Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome. We had quite a week, I would say. So let's talk about some news. What I wanted to talk about today is the compliance-related news or regulatory-related news that are coming in relation to new Russian sanctions and the discussion how to potentially seize or reuse frozen Russian assets. And also we have to talk about Budapest on, Budapest off. Is it good? Is it bad? So I'm just going to give you my perception of how I see it. And yeah, so let's get to this. So first of all, Russian sanctions, package number 19. Guys, I mean, I am already unsure how to count these packages. And I kind of feel that especially because we had this whole tariff debacle earlier this year, the meaning and the seriousness of sanctions is lost. In case if you missed it, because I mean, we have Russian sanctions right now every other week, so I'm not surprised if you missed it or if you feel like this is some kind of a background story that's not going away. We had a new package of sanctions announced by the European Union and by the US. Some of the sanctions are just ridiculous and probably are not going to impact anybody. The big thing that I believe is new, even though most people were surprised, like how come it's new? Two big Russian oil companies have been sanctioned. One is Lukoil, which is a publicly listed company, and another one is Rosneft, which is a governmentally owned company. And the interesting part there is that, at least that's my understanding, that these sanctions have been imposed not because Europe or US are buying anything from these companies, but rather they wanted to target India, because apparently India and partially China, they buy like crude oil from these companies, they refine it, and then they resell it potentially back to Europe or some other places. And my understanding is that if oil or gas are being transported by land through like different pipes, they're not impacted because the way how they're being paid for and the whole contractual settlement around these types of arrangements is already outside of the Western payment system or contractual system. It doesn't need insurance, but the seaborne trade of oil, and this is mostly from Russia to India, is impacted because some of it is still being paid using US dollars. And secondly, if you transport oil from Russia to India, you need some kind of an insurance company, you need the fleet, you need some arrangements that can touch Russian owned companies. And an interesting part here is that Indian officials said that they are assessing whether or not they need to revise some arrangements, because, I mean, probably they had some kind of contingency planning and they already assessed what they would do if these types of sanctions were to come into force. They cannot possibly not expect it at some point, right? So my point here is that most likely they're not buying this oil or gas from these companies directly. They're buying it through a number of intermediaries, and that's what they're checking, like, to make sure. But my point is probably they're going to find a way. And another interesting situation here, I understand that there are some refineries in Europe, in Hungary, and I also believe in Germany, that are either owned or controlled or have significant contractual relationships with Rosneft, and now they're asking for an exemption. So that's kind of weird, because why do you introduce a package of sanctions if 2 days after significant entities within your territory saying, hey, we're impacted, we need an exemption because otherwise something is off. So overall, my feeling is that the meaning of sanctions combined with tariffs, because right now we see that both of these tools are being used not necessarily because you believe they will be effective, but they are used for almost like theatrical purposes. Like, we have to do something, we know it's not going to work, but because we have to do something, that's the declaration of sanctions or tariffs or both. So a fun part, maybe, I don't know if it's true, but what I heard probably a month ago or 2 months ago was this, that US increased a price that they promise for people who will tell them where Maduro is, the Venezuelan president. And apparently several people started applying to give information about Maduro and his location. And this website, like something related to OFAC, was crashed because of the extremely intense demand and usage. And everybody who tried to give information about Maduro essentially said that the presidential palace address is in Caracas, like Venezuela. That's the address. Where is my $50 million, or how high the price was? And then apparently it was either Maduro. I saw this as a repost on X, but I don't know if it was really the account of Maduro or if it was somebody kind of impersonating him. But I thought the joke was amazing. Essentially, the Maduro, or so-called Maduro, posted his picture standing on some kind of balcony of the presidential palace, and the text was something to the effect that, hey, I heard that somebody doesn't know where I am living, where my residence is. Just for the avoidance of any doubts, this is what my residence looks like. This is the address. I believe there are many people who have already volunteered to provide this information. So I'm not asking to give me the money for this information, because I believe there have been many people who came before me with this information. However, I have a counter proposal. If somebody still has the access to the Epstein files, I am offering a $50 million bounty to people who are going to provide information about the location or access to Epstein files to me. So I thought that was funny. Anyway, so that's why I don't take announcements of the Russian sanctions seriously. I don't believe for many fintechs they're going to be impacted, because the use cases for new sanctions are so narrow and unique, and probably people who are impacted, they already expected that and know what to do. So that's sanctions. And now we have to talk about confiscation of assets. It is so interesting that there are two stories about confiscation of assets now going on in Europe. And even if you think about the nature of that, it's wild. So the first story obviously is coming out of Belgium, because this is where the vast majority of the frozen Russian assets are being in Euroclear. And it seems that right now, European Union or European Commission or some bodies, they're trying to come up with a scheme or a framework how they can take these assets and use it as a collateral to lend money to Ukraine under conditions that Ukraine would only have to pay it back if Russia pays for the reparation. And I mean, the likelihood of the reparation happening is very, very questionable. But I want to kind of start with the origin of this story. So first of all, now they say it's about 150 or 160 billion dollars or euros. And in the beginning, the amount that was declared as frozen assets was around like close to 300. So my first question is, what happened to the other half? Like, have we used them? Are they being pledged somewhere? Like, where are they? Why this amount? And my second question is, in most European countries and in most like Western countries with some kind of legal frameworks, you could take somebody's assets either when the parties contractually agree, so there has to be a contract, or there has to be a court decision. So if you want to take somebody's assets, you need a court decision, and announcement of sanctions is not equal to the court decision. So if you really want to confiscate somebody's assets, you actually need a court decision. It's my understanding. Otherwise, it's not going to be fully legal. And when the war is over, or when there is some kind of settlement, potentially Russia would have a right to claim its assets back, and it creates a huge exposure or risk for Euroclear in Belgium, how they're going to pay it back. So what I believe the government of Belgium said was that, okay, so first of all, give us the legal framework. What is the like foundational legal basis for like reusing these assets? Secondly, they said there are other Russian assets frozen in other countries, which is true. Belgium is the biggest, but there are other institutions. And they said, what is happening to these other assets? Why we are the only source that will be used for this purpose? If we make this decision about confiscation of assets, why don't we do it for all the assets with all institutions? Why only one institution is targeted, which is a fair question. It's not like the assets within Euroclear are somehow dirtier or more criminal than other assets. They all were frozen at the same time, I believe, right? So it's a valid question, and I honestly don't know the answer for that. And last but not least, they say we want, like, I mean Belgians and Euroclear and Belgian government, they say, okay, if the European Union bodies decide to reuse these assets or give it to Ukraine, we want some kind of an insurance policy or decision where European Union, in case if Russia ever comes back and claims that, and potentially there is some kind of court proceeding, or alternatively, if Russia takes some properties of Belgium or of Euroclear in some other countries, or maybe the Russia friendly countries would confiscate something that they have access to wherever. So there is like a loss for Euroclear or Belgium, that all these countries who are planning this scheme, they will equally share the risk, which again, I kind of feel it is a fair expectation, because Belgium alone or Euroclear alone will never be in a position to lose or pay back or compensate the amount that is equal to 150 billion. I believe that's like, somebody said it's close to the GDP of Belgium, or like, so it's big, right? It's disproportionately big for Belgium only. And this is not even taking into account the risk, if they do it, that all like Chinese and Arabic and Indian and other people who and institutions who keep their money within Euroclear, they can just say, well, we don't know about you anymore, bye. Like, that's a monetary risk, but it's not a direct risk, so to speak. So those are valid questions. And if it wasn't enough, if, like, obviously you could probably guess that I'm very much against these steps, because as far as I can see, people just want to do one step, like, let's confiscate the assets and give them to Ukraine, because like somebody like Kaya Kallas or somebody else, yeah, what's the name, like Stunning and Brave Kaya Kallas, they said, if we don't use the Russian assets, we have to use the money of the European taxpayers, which to me is not a convincing argument, because we still need a legal foundation for doing something, right? So I haven't seen any convincing line of argumentation. What happens next? And if it wasn't enough, we actually have a case study that happened just 1 week ago in, like, next to Belgium in the Netherlands, which, like, again, a ridiculous story. The story is, if you haven't heard, so the government of the Netherlands somehow took control over a factory, Expedia, that is part of the Chinese holding, and they're producing chips or some components for some chips that are used in like automotive industry and some other European industries. So what happened one day, the Netherlands authorities appointed the new management for this institution, and they said that from now on, all contractual relationships, all shipments, all commitments are going to be controlled by this newly established management, and all the Chinese appointed management is being fired, which is like wild. They didn't have any court decision, they didn't have any litigation, there was no early warnings. They said that this action is a question of the national security. To be honest, I don't know if this factory was producing something that is related to national security. I mean, now everybody talks about chips, but that's not even the point. What happened is that the Chinese, they became furious, and you would expect that they would become furious, right? And what they said, that from now on, since we have lost control over what's happening in the Netherlands, we are not going to ship inputs that are needed for this factory, and we are not going to fulfill our commitments to anybody in Europe or US who participate, especially in Europe, who participated in this action. So we are not going to ship and deliver the end product, the chips that are needed, until this matter is being resolved. And apparently, I tried to research this story, and it is unbelievable, seriously. So apparently, what happened is that the Dutch management, the new management, I mean, they didn't expect this step, because there are some reports now that certain factories in the Netherlands and especially in Germany, they're saying that their production cycles are being compromised, because these chips are supposed to be coming. Now they're not coming. This is a key ingredient for their production cycle, and they don't know what to do. And they are not the ones technically who seized the control over this factory, but they are obviously impacted, and nobody knows what to do. And the Dutch management essentially says that now China is weaponizing this situation, but they were the ones who took the first step, and I believe it's pretty unusual, to say the least. I don't know if we ever had a precedent in the recent history in Europe where, without a court decision, without some kind of legal process, somebody would come and take over the management and control over a factory. That's kind of wild. And also, even if you want to do this, you at least have to anticipate the downstream effects of what it's going to mean for the production environment, for the contractual relationships, for the entire supply chain. Can you please at least think about it? I mean, isn't it like economics or industry production one-on-one? I don't know, man. It's crazy that first this is happening, and secondly, that when this is happening, they're not prepared for the retaliation or pushback from the party you're trying to punish. That's unheard of. And at the moment when I'm recording this, I believe either this is not yet resolved, or even if it is resolved or being resolved, or there are some kind of, secret negotiations going on. I haven't seen any publications about this story in the public sources. So if something happened, let me know. I'm really curious how it's going to be resolved, because I believe they need to, because European factories need these chips. Nobody else can produce it. China said we're not going to ship it. So either you have to fire a lot of people and stop the production and break your contractual commitments with all these factories that have been impacted in Europe, or you have to stay on the principle, but then you have to be prepared to suffer some losses. And last time I checked, Europe doesn't have a lot of money. So my point is that if just a week ago we tried to seize somebody else's assets and we haven't thought about the consequences or the strategy, what we're going to do when the other side retaliates, maybe we shouldn't seize another category of assets before we fully understand what is going to happen and how we're going to address the risks. Is it too much to ask? Well, anyway, so that's why, again, I don't feel that the legal foundation of recent decisions that are obviously very politically motivated, these steps do not convince me at all that people who originated or people who generate these ideas are very intelligent. Just saying. Well, anyway, last but not least, obviously, I was following the story of potential summit meeting in Budapest, and I was skeptical but also hopeful that it will happen and some progress could be reached, or at least it would be a step towards, a peaceful resolution. I am of the opinion that negotiations and trying to see common grounds is better than not negotiating, because I, obviously have people I know who are in Kiev and also people who I distantly know in Russia, and they're, they're at risk of dying, or somebody close to them could be impacted, and it's terrible. And that's why I am in favor of negotiations. But my point here is that this is one of the steps where I'm not just disappointed by, the American administration, but I'm almost disgusted. If you remember, like last year, every single European, or almost every single European leader was hoping that, that Kamala Harris would win. And only Orban had, the guts or the honesty to say what he thinks and say that he supports Donald Trump. And he has been his most loyal and open supporter, and he created a lot of antagonism and pushback in Europe from other European leaders for that. I'm not just talking here about whether you agree with Orban or not. I'm just saying that he is probably the most loyal supporter of Trump that Trump has in Europe. Because everybody else who is going to the Oval Office and asks for money and asks Americans not to leave Europe and asks for weapons and asks for, I don't know, backdrops and peacekeepers and whatever, they hate Trump's guts. Like, you don't need to be very intelligent to see that. They need Trump, they need certain decisions, they go and kiss up to him, but they don't like him. And by kind of releasing this information about Budapest potential meeting and then calling it off, Trump literally threw Orban under the bus. And to me, doing this to somebody who took a lot of criticism for supporting you is just low. I mean, it's not like I had a lot of idealistic expectations about Trump administration, but I kind of was hoping that they do have a strategy and they would, you know, two steps forward, one step back. But I still was hoping that they are on the path to some kind of establishing peace. But now it's like, man, it's a joke. Like, anyway, so it is, in my opinion, it's very sad. And I definitely view it as a setback and as a disappointment that um, this potential summit is likely postponed. Well, it's very unfortunate, but even more so, any kind of idealistic expectations, because just to be clear, when Trump administration came into power, and especially when David Sachs was appointed as a crypto and AI czar, I was excited. I was excited because of Doge, because I believe in the small government. I was excited to see the exposure around, waste and abuse and some kind of dismantling of the US AID. So I was very happy about what Doge was doing. And I also was very happy that the founder of Silk Road was released. I was happy that we're not going to have a risk of digital currencies and CBDCs coming out of the US. So there were a lot of good decisions around crypto. I was excited about that. And I was hoping that, somehow it is a good sign for what else is possible. And with the, total chickening out over the Epstein files and the Iran war and like how they treat Charlie Kirk's situation, and now that like betrayal of Orban, even though, like, to be clear, I've been to Hungary, I have no affiliation to Orban. I purely assess it as how somebody treats their supporters and friends versus how people can throw people under the bus. That's my only criteria here. And to me, it's like I am so over Trump that it's not even funny. Well, anyway, so hopefully somebody with a better heart and a better brain will take over this project and something good would come out of this. But anyway, so that's my assessment and opinion about the news of the last weeks. Like I said, in conclusion, let's repeat. Sanctions and tariffs are a joke. They're not going to have any meaningful impact. They may create some work to do, but for very specific niche industries. Seizing of assets, neither in the Netherlands nor in Belgium, isn't a good idea. And I'm sad that Budapest is off. Well, that's where I'm going to finish this program. Thank you so very much for being here. And you're going to hear from me next week, probably Sunday. I will be in Luxembourg, so you will hear from me back from Luxembourg. Have a wonderful Sunday. Bye, guys.